Welcome back to the Latino Athlete podcast. Today we have a very special guest. He is the senior writer for Baseball America, and he is one of the pioneers in the international prospect coverage. And that is something that I'm very interested in. That's something that our platform is very interested in. Please welcome Ben Badler. How are you, Ben?
I'm doing great. Baseball's coming back, so I'm pretty happy.
I don't know. Thank you again for your time. I know last week you were preparing for the draft, and definitely want to hear about that. Definitely want to hear about your takes. Who were the winners? Who were the losers in the draft? We start our show with the background of the persons that we have on board. So, can you please let us know who is Ben Badler?
I guess where to start. I mean, I always knew I wanted to work in sports ever since I was a little kid. I remember growing up. I don't know if maybe the younger readers don't know, but there was a newspaper you would get in the mail delivered to your home. This big thing, and you would spread it out. I would just go on my floor when I was 7, 8 years old. As soon as I learned how to read, just going over the sports page every morning, reading mostly just going over box scores, whether it was baseball, basketball, football. But obviously baseball is kind of the most numbers, or really the main sport when it comes to the box scores. Looking over all that, so I just got hooked on it since I was a little kid, and always knew I wanted to work in sports, to the point where when I graduated from high school, I applied to colleges based on which schools had sport management programs, because I knew I wanted to work in sports when I grew up. When I got older, wasn't totally sure which sport I wanted to focus on, but I always really gravitated, I think, a lot toward baseball. And went to UMass Sport Management at my home state school. They have a really good program there, so definitely got very fortunate in that regard. Graduated from there with a degree in sport management. Knew I wanted to work in baseball at that point, and I graduated from school back in 2007. And that summer, I initially thought, all right, I'd like to work in maybe a front office in some capacity with a major league club. But that 2007, I got an internship with Baseball America, where they're based in Durham, North Carolina. So I went down there for the summer, and pretty soon after I got started there, they offered me a position full time. So it's definitely a route that a lot of my coworkers at Baseball America have gone through that path, and other people, colleagues who I've worked with there before, and who've gone on to different jobs in media or scouting, and front offices too, even up through the assistant GM level, have kind of gone through that same route. So that's kind of the path, or the condensed version of the background that I have, and the path that got me here today.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely want to get into all that. And I know Baseball America has been around for a really long time, and they've pivoted through years. And I think what I've noticed now, they're becoming more of a media company, producing a lot more content, more video content specifically, and showcasing and promoting more of the athletes.
The primary focus for me is our pro prospects. So all of our rankings and our scouting reports that you see, both in our website and our prospect handbook, where we rank the top 30 prospects with scouting reports on each player for each organization. That's a big chunk of the responsibility. Obviously, this season that's been difficult to do. There's basically no baseball happening right now, and the minor league season is in jeopardy. So that's another challenge right now. But I do a lot of that. And then I do, the main thing that I think a lot of people probably know me for, just because there's not very many other people covering this area, is coverage of international baseball, and really the international signing process. Started doing that back in 2008, and it's just kind of it's awesome just to see how much not just our coverage has kind of grown and evolved, but just the evolution of the of the amateur, training and scouting and signing process has evolved over, over those last, 10, 14, years, as as long as I've been there. It really has changed a lot over time. And, even, I think back 3 to 5 years ago, there's so much, it feels like a different era,
Mhm.
even then. So, we do, obviously cover college, we cover the draft, so I make sure I stay on top of the top guys there. But, I think primarily for me, the focus is on the pro and the international.
In terms of Baseball America and their business model, they create this content, this ranking, then they package it, and then they offer it to professional leagues. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's, our
It's like
subscribers are
subscription
sort of
based.
yeah, it's our subscribers are sort of a mix of people who work in the industry, right? So, people who work for clubs, people who are agents, all sorts of different people who are people who work for, independent companies, training facilities, tech companies, all sorts of other people. But they make a big chunk of our readers, but also just baseball fans, especially the hardcore baseball fans. I mean, if like I was saying before, we write up the top 30 prospects in each organization. For the draft, we rank the top 500 players in the draft, which is interesting this year because obviously there was only 160 picks. We rank the top, 100 international players. We write up 200, 250 or so international signings every year. Really extensive college coverage from our guys who cover that end of the game. So, for the casual fan, it's probably, we're not going to get them to subscribe, but really if you're, the hardcore fan who's looking for that kind of information, whether it's for your fantasy team or you're just that diehard of a fan, that's kind of our core audience at Baseball America.
Yeah, and I've been impressed at the quality of the coverage through the years, and obviously
Thank you.
giving you guys the name of the Bible of baseball, which I concur. I mean, I've been amazed at the coverage from all the levels, from the younger levels to the professional levels, and you know, being a platform focused on Latinos here in the U.S., the international piece that you've done, and I know a lot of players that we talk to, they know you. The Baseball America guy, the one that comes to our showcases in our academy, which I definitely want to get into a little bit later. But yeah, I've been impressed just being in the space myself. I've been impressed with the quality of content that you guys produce.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So in terms of the draft being cut down, personally, how do you feel about the draft being cut this year?
Yeah, I hate it. I mean, there's nobody who, is really better off for it other than, the owners get to save some money. But, I don't really care about that. Like, it's, there's, if it's one thing if you want to cut it down. Oh, look, obviously I understand there's some need to cut it down. You don't need a 40-round draft when there's basically no high school baseball that's been played this year than a few games, Florida, Southern California, a little bit of the early college season. So I understand you're not going to go through a 40-round draft or even maybe a 20-round draft, but, even if you just keep it to a 10-round draft, you get a lot more players who could sign, especially, high school kids who want an opportunity to go straight to pro ball. You don't get that, the teams, the general managers, the scouts, the whole front offices, those, all of those people, I shouldn't say all, but, pretty overwhelmingly, I would say those folks wanted to have a longer draft than just 5 rounds. They want the players, but the owners were so focused on cost containment and saving some money that they just drove it down to 5 rounds, which is really unfortunate. It's it's worse for the fans. It's worse for the players. It's worse for the teams. Except for the owners who get to save a little bit of money. So overall, obviously with the virus, who knows what's going to
Mhm.
be the situation next year, but hopefully next year we can get back to more of a more of a normal draft system.
Yeah, absolutely. From your time covering the draft, both domestic and international, what are the major differences? I know internationally, most of the players are trying to get prepared for July 2nd, which is the big date internationally. But if you can talk about the differences, I guess kind of like the pros and cons, because I also know of some international players coming to the States, going to high school for a little bit, and then trying to get drafted. Which one do you recommend?
Yeah, and then you have some other players too. I mean, like you said, that happens. And then you have some other players too, like I think of like Alex Reyes with the St. Louis Cardinals. Some other examples too, where a player has actually gone to high school in the United States or grown up in the United States, but he's has maybe parents or family who lives in the Dominican Republic, and then they move, to the Dominican Republic, and they have to stay there for at least a year, and then sign as an international free agent. So Lucius Fox did that when he signed with the Rays, or excuse me, signed with the Giants. He got traded to the Rays for $6 million a few years back. I would say that certainly worked out for him.
Hmm.
Jose Salas, a player who grew up in the Orlando area and just signed a big contract last year with the Miami Marlins. His family in Venezuela, so sometimes you see that too. But yeah, I mean the big differences are looking obviously in the United States, United States, Canada, Puerto Rico. You have a draft, so you really have very little wiggle room in terms of if you're a player picking what team you're going to sign with. And if you're a club, you also have very restricted access to which players you can sign. Whereas, internationally, there's a free agent system. Players have more freedom to pick which club they're going to sign with. It is hard capped, so each team has roughly between $5 to $6-ish million that they can spend, but they can't go over that spending amount. So you can't just sign anybody for 12, $15 million. There's obviously limitations, but if you're the Tampa Bay Rays and you say, hey, that Wander Franco, that shortstop out there who's 15, 16 years old, we think he's the best player in the class. We can go out and sign him. The Yankees could sign him, the Red Sox, anybody can go out and sign him. You have the freedom to sign, basically whoever you want. Whereas in the draft, hey, we love Spencer Torkelson, or we love Austin Martin, but we have the 10th pick in the draft, so there's a lot more limits on what you can do as a club in the draft. There's a lot more restrictions there, and then obviously the other big difference too is just the age difference, right? In the draft, you're looking primarily at college juniors who are 21 years old for the most part. Some seniors maybe who are a little bit older, and some JUCO guys who are a little bit in between. But mostly 21-year-old college juniors and high school seniors who are mostly 18 years old, or in some cases 17. So you're looking at those guys where even on the younger end, you're looking at 18 to sometimes 17-year-old players in the draft. In the international market, you're looking at players primarily from the Dominican Republic and Venezuela, but Mexico, Panama, Colombia, Australia, countries in Europe, every now and then have players, but you're pretty much looking at players where the signing age is 16, and a lot of time the scouting on them is being done at 15, 14, sometimes even 13 years old. So, whereas you're looking at a 21-year-old college junior is not a finished product by any means, but there's a lot less projection, either in terms of physicality or banking on the tools changing or improving with the player, by the time he's 21, or even at 18 years old, there's even less projection there that you're having to do compared to scouting a kid who's, 14, 15 years old, who's, he might be running a 7.2 in the 60 right now, but, by the time he's 16, 17, puts on some weight, he might be a plus runner eventually, right? These kids can grow not just get bigger and stronger, but actually get taller. There's a lot of kids who, I've seen personally where, I remember going up to, somebody who was running a showcase one time. And I was looking at the roster. I said, "No, this is a misprint. That's this kid." It was like William Lugo. I was like, "I think I have the wrong number. That's not him. This is some other guy. He's like 6'6" or 6'4", whatever he was." I was like, he's like, "No, that's him." I was like, "Really?" I saw that kid, like 6, 7 months ago. He was like 2 inches shorter, 3 inches shorter. So, the physical changes obviously is such a bigger difference than anything you really deal with for the most part. Scouting the older players in the United States, and then kind of like I was just alluding, you're talking about college players, high school players in the United States. They're playing organized baseball either for their college team, their high school team. College players, you'll see them in a summer league like the Cape Cod League, the North Woods League. Or the high school players are playing for their travel ball team and all these showcases in the summer. With international players, especially Dominican Republic, Venezuela, these guys are, they have, trainers, guys who basically run a program and are fronting all of the expenses for the most part for all these kids to play. And then there's not a high school team that these kids play for. There is a lot more organization now than there used to be 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. There's a lot more, these guys getting together and, these trainer organized leagues or just kind of playing like informal type games, one academy against the other. So you're getting to see these kids in games a lot more than they used to, but it's a very different setup in terms of how these kids are playing the game and how you're evaluating them in that context and that environment in the Dominican Republic or in Venezuela or Colombia compared to the way you evaluate them in the context where you see them playing in college or high school baseball in the United States.
What have you seen in terms of the player game? I know you mentioned they're being evaluated a bit different, whether it's international here in the U.S. But you're looking at travel ball here in the U.S. and you're looking at some of these academies. Where is there a big discrepancy between the talent or the talent level between these 14, 15, 16-year-olds in international ball and these 14, 15-year-olds here in the U.S.? Is there a big difference?
It's a good question because it's one of those things where a lot of the players I'm seeing, kind of like I was alluding to earlier in the United States, I'm generally seeing them at like, you know, 17, 18, sometimes 16 years old. But then when I go to the Dominican Republic or go somewhere else to see these Latin American players, a lot of times now I'm looking at them at 14, 15 years old. So there's definitely a difference in terms of just the age gap. What I have seen in terms of seeing some of the younger 16-year-old players that I do see in the United States compared to Latin America. I mean, the talent is pretty comparable, at least on the higher end. Obviously, the United States, blows away the Dominican Republic just in terms of raw population. So in terms of just the overall, number of players that you see, obviously that's going to have an impact. But the kids from the Dominican Republic and Venezuela, these kids are training every single day, pretty much. A lot of them, they're training it like it's almost like it's a full-time job. So a lot of reps. You can definitely see that, especially among the shortstops. I think that's one area where you can really see the development of Latin American players in particular, because you can have a coach pretty much every day go out and hit you 100 fungos a day if you're in the Dominican
Yeah.
Republic. There's nothing nothing stopping you. Whereas if you see an outfielder sometimes. Sometimes their instincts are a little bit less refined compared to the shortstop. Is a little harder to simulate. that kind of live read off the bat every day. You kind of have to have more of a game situation there. So yeah, definitely. I mean, at the higher ends, talent level, I would say the Latin American players, by the time they're 16 compared to the players in the States at the same age, it's pretty comparable. It's just obviously when we're looking at players in Latin America, typically, from at least from a major league club perspective, you're looking at them usually at a younger age in Latin America compared to where you're usually looking them at the age you're looking at in the United States.
Got it. What are your personal opinions around youth sports here in the U.S.? I know it's been well documented uh, how expensive it is to participate in youth sports in America. How many kids from underrepresented communities are getting left behind because, as you know, it's all about travel. My son plays travel baseball, and summer times we send him to Dominican Republic to play for a few months. But
Okay.
for him to participate in a lot of these kids on his teams is pretty expensive to play on a travel team, depending where you are. So, what do you think about that? About just the high cost and the process and the organization here in the U.S.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that baseball is this sport where there's just so many costs involved now for kids to play, and it kind of goes back to one of the differences I was talking about before between players in the United States versus Dominican Republic and Venezuela. Pretty much in the United States, you've as a parent of a child, you've pretty much got to pay all those costs up front for bats and spikes and balls. Time at the cage. Tournament entry fees. You want to go see them you want to go see your own son
Like
play
the
in a game.
Cal Ripken experience.
Yeah, you want to go see your own son play. They're going to charge you to go into the venue itself, right? You got to stay at the hotel that they make you stay at some of these places. So, all of these costs just really, really add up. And like you said, I think it prices out kids who don't come from a household that can afford to make all of these upfront expenses. And then, oh, by the way, the payoff, I mean, it's got to be, not just a scholarship, because you're not going to get a full scholarship
Mhm.
in baseball. You're still going to end up paying a lot of money for school and end up with student debt that way. So it's a lot different than basketball or football, where you can get a full ride to one of these programs, and obviously the costs are far less. I mean, one of the things I look, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things that need to be reformed about the system of developing players in the Dominican Republic and Venezuela. But one of the things I do like about that system is we have players who, you think about a kid who grows up poor in the United States and compare them to, kids who grow up real poor in the Dominican Republic or in Venezuela, kids who, grow up in homes with, maybe no indoor plumbing, maybe no, floor in their own house. You see the homes that some of these kids come from, and obviously, each kid's situation is different. But we have kids coming out of these countries who are way poorer than a lot of the kids who are even coming from families that are struggling in the United States. But we have a system in those countries where these trainers, the academies, the guys who run them are paying all the upfront expenses, all of all the gloves, all the spikes, all the travel expenses, the batting gloves, all the equipment, all the travel for showcases in the United States. They're paying the airfare, they're paying food. They're some of these guys are putting these excuse me, putting these kids up. Got to take a drink here. Getting fired
Take your
up.
time. Take your time. No worries.
They're putting these kids up in housing of their own. Some of them that they've that they're paying all the expenses up front. Now in exchange, when the player signs, they get a pretty big chunk of the signing bonus. but they're paying a lot of those costs up front. And then, if a kid never signs, his cost is basically zero. You don't, you get the trainer gets a commission uh, off that's based off the player's signing bonus. So if he doesn't sign, then he doesn't pay. So it's something where, yeah, I mean, I wish there could be some type of um, you know way to help players who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds in the United States to to be able to play baseball, and to be more incentivized to play baseball, and just to be able to afford that for their families, because we have this system in the Dominican Republic, in Venezuela, where we have some kids who grow up in real poor families, and we have a way to get them in baseball and get them playing baseball. And I wish we could find a way to bring something like that to some of the kids in the United States who where baseball might just be pricing out some of these kids just based on the financial status of their families.
Yeah, and that's something that we're looking at as a platform ourselves is, how can we provide exposure to these kids, and how can we provide some financial assistance to a lot of these kids from the inner cities. I know there's been a big push around African American players and promoting baseball in the inner cities here in the U.S. to get these players on the field and to play baseball. We've been thinking about it as a platform ourselves. What can we do better locally in the grassroots to promote the game and also get them to play the game. I don't think it's a lack of interest. I think it's all economical. If you're in the city and you walk in on the street, you'll see 5 to 7 basketball courts, but there's just no room in cities for baseball fields. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of these kids do not play baseball. And obviously the popularity here in the U.S. around basketball and football. But yeah, I think there's a lot of work that could be done. We're trying to do whatever we can to help promote the game within these communities, but there's definitely some challenges, and I hope that there's some companies and organizations that can help improve that experience, because as a parent, I know how expensive it is to play in these travel balls and participate in these tournaments.
Yeah, that's what's so striking too. When you go down to the Dominican Republic, even just like driving from the airport into Santo Domingo, you'll drive by and you'll see these baseball fields, and it's not anything organized, just kids playing like sandlot pickup type games. You have all the best athletes in the Dominican Republic want to play baseball. They don't want to play. Their dream is not to play in the NBA or the NFL. These kids all want to be Nelson Cruz or Javi Baez or they all want to play baseball. So it's just it's such a dramatic change to just be down there and see all of these kids playing baseball, where baseball is easily the number one sport. Everybody's playing baseball everywhere you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think of everything that's going on with minor league baseball? I know Baseball America has done a wonderful job with the coverage of baseball and some of the rules. I read an article a few months ago how Major League Baseball was trying to cut down the amount of teams in minor league baseball. What are your thoughts around that? Because we know that a majority or a large part of those players are international players that are in the minor league system.
Yeah, it's so they're basically talking about shrinking the minor leagues, cutting out around 42 minor league teams. Which my opinion is that I think if a team wants to have if an organization wants to have fewer minor league clubs, they should have the freedom to reduce the number of clubs or affiliates that they have. If the Houston Astros and I just decide, look, I don't we don't need 6 or 7 different minor league affiliates. We would just want to have 4 or 5. That should be, they should have the freedom to do so. But on the other hand, I don't like where it it forces teams to cut down on the number of minor league affiliates they have. It takes away their freedom that way. Like, yeah, the Yankees have a lot of minor league affiliates relative to other clubs, but so do the Tampa Bay Rays, right? Like, it's not some exorbitant cost, but if you see it as an advantage for your club to have more roster spots and have more affiliates in your organization, and you want to make that investment as an owner, as an organization, into your minor league pipeline, I think you should be able to do that. So this sort of forces this, it's like this anti-freedom rule. It reduces everybody's ability to compete, which contains costs for owners, because they don't have to spend more money to gain some kind of a competitive advantage, because they know every team is going to be limited to a certain number of affiliates. But it takes away that freedom and competition that I think should be in place. So obviously fewer opportunities for players overall. I don't think that's a good thing. And in terms of how it's going to affect international players, relative to American players, I think it sort of remains to be seen right now, because I think the big thing is what happens with what teams are able to do in the Dominican Summer League. Because right now you have a lot of teams that say, hey, like, we want to have two teams, two full rosters in the Dominican Summer League, because we want to sign a lot of these guys, because like, there's the Jason Dominguez of the world, those kind of guys, Wander Franco, but like there's not that many of them. So like there's a handful of real obvious guys that stand out at 16 years old that we're signing as clubs, but for the most part there's we're not firing with a ton of accuracy, frankly, on kids at 16 years old. So we want to get a lot of them into the organization to be able to coach them up and train them and develop these guys through organization, because there's so many guys who will sign for $30,000, $10,000, especially pitching. So I think teams understand, hey, we need a lot of roster spots to to try to increase our odds on getting some big leaguers out of this. So if MLB comes in and makes a rule that says you can only have one Dominican Summer League team instead of two, that would significantly, I think, reduce the volume of players that are signing every year, and that would be I think that would be really damaging. I hope that does not happen, for Latin American players. But so far we just don't know yet what the what the ruling is going to be on that down the road, because right now they're just they've only focused on the affiliates in the United States, outside of the the complex leagues in Arizona and Florida.
Got it. How do you think technology has affected scouting? I know a couple years ago I read how Major League Baseball let go of hundreds of scouts locally in the States. So I know there's some good and some bad, but how has technology affected scouting for talent?
I think it's at a big time impact, and it's definitely an evolution of scouting, right? I think that you certainly, I think you probably hear like the buzzier things, like the implementation of whether it's Statcast at the major league parks, or TrackMan, Rapsodo, the bat sensors, Blast, Diamond Kinetics, that kind of stuff. So there's all these new tools that teams are obviously using to to quantify things that we couldn't quantify before, and I think that's especially helpful with pro scouting, guys at the major league level and the minor league level, where the closer up you are to the major leagues, and the more data you have on those players, the the more actionable that information is, the more valuable it is to be able to make decisions on it. Now you're seeing at the at the college level as well. And I think it's, helpful to be able to have a better understanding of, spin rates on a pitcher's, fastball, breaking ball, that kind of stuff, exit velocities, especially when you're looking at a wide range of players at the college level. But, um, I think especially the younger you go, the more grassroots scouting is still really the primary driver of how teams make decisions. Teams are still using things like the bat sensors and things like the Rapsodo TrackMan type units, or the fancier Edgertronic cameras. But it's there's only so much value I think you can get from knowing the exit velocity of a 15-year-old kid in the Dominican Republic. Because okay, yeah, like that the kid who's just the biggest, strongest kid at 15, 16 years old is not necessarily going to be the best kid down the road. The kid who's 6'1", but weighs 150 pounds with broad shoulders, like um, when he's going to get stronger, the exit velocity numbers are going to be different. So really, there you're looking at more at actions, at mechanics, the way a player goes about doing things in the field, his instincts for the game. A lot of things where teams are still using technology, and I think one piece of technology that is probably just or a couple pieces of technology that just aren't don't get a lot of articles written about them, but are probably the most helpful right now, or have really changed things the most over the last 10 or so years, are just one, people's access to a smartphone. I mean, I can't even imagine doing scouting in the Dominican Republic 20 years ago before even like a GPS system, right? Like, again, you're not going to, you don't have a set schedule for when, UCLA is playing their game. Like you're trying to find these, fields in remote areas. You can snap a quick video and send to your boss instantaneously. Right now, there's instant communication tools, texting, obviously, or WhatsApp, different communication platforms for people to be able to stay in touch instantly that you didn't have 10, 15 years ago, and just good quality video cameras, not even the high tech slow motion, super slow motion like the Edgertronic cameras that are get so much buzz, but just a camera. Again, scouts want to see players, and obviously in person is ideal, but to be able to just gather so much video now, to keep track of these guys, to if you see a video of a player, like, oh wait, maybe I need to go and something stood out about that guy, I need to go back and see him, or if sometimes you're seeing a guy that way for the first time. An agent sends you a video of a guy and you're like, huh, okay, I'll make sure we we send somebody in to go see him. So yeah, it's definitely a big it's been a huge evolution, and I think there's a lot of new technology that's gotten a lot of buzz, and is definitely helpful for the higher up you go. But grassroots scouting and some of those tools that maybe we take a little bit for granted with the phone in everybody's pocket is still pretty powerful.
I want to get into your experience as being the pioneer of international prospect coverage, right? When was the first time you were assigned to cover these players, and how was your experience when you first got there?
So the short answer is actually never. So which is, it's been really good at Baseball America. So I got hired in 2007, and I was doing a little bit of everything. Helped on, minor league side, the pro side, did some work for, college stuff, a little bit of draft stuff here and there. And then, the next year but, it's sort of a nebulous job description. I was doing a little bit of everything, but they gave me a lot of freedom, which was good, because the next year I heard about this player, Juan Duran from the Dominican Republic, this like 6'6" outfielder who must have been in like January or February that year, signs with the Reds for $2 million. And I tracked down the story, and it was really unusual because the signing date is July 2nd, so people thought, oh, he's eligible to sign on July 2nd, except that the Reds knew of this really obscure rule from, I think, like the 1980s, where they could technically sign him and like stash him on their Pioneer League roster because of his date of birth. He technically would have turned 17 before the end of that season. So there's this, they changed the rule after that. But it was this really unusual signing at the time where the Reds just signed this player for $2 million, and nobody else knew he was even eligible to sign yet. So I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I thought about it more. I'm like, our prospect handbook, I think at that time was like 25% international signings. And, I think so many people know Baseball America for the draft. We cover the draft like, total lunatics, right? But we don't really cover international players the same way we cover the draft picks before they sign. So, I just kind of started doing it on my own. 2008 was, that was the year that Michael Manoah, 16-year-old right-handed pitcher, signs with the Oakland A's for $4.25 million, a record bonus at the time. And a whole bunch of other players signed that year too for a lot of money who never, for the most part, ended up amounting to anything. But that was the kind of the first year where nobody at Baseball America and nobody anywhere else really had covered the July 2nd signing process in terms of previewing it and leading up to that process. It would usually be like, oh, like the Yankees signed this guy like Jesus Montero for a lot of money. Like, who's that? Like, let's call around and find out. So there wasn't really anything. I was just sort of learning it all on the fly myself. I mean, obviously, we had a model of or a process of coverage for for the draft that that was helpful for me to to borrow from. But obviously, like I was saying before, it's a very different process, and especially at that time, there was very little organization anywhere, right? In terms of organized games, there was a lot of guys just getting signed off of workouts for the most part, BP, live BP, that kind of stuff. There wasn't any of, there was no Dominican Prospect League or International Prospect League or JDB baseball where, these guys are bringing all these guys together in games now, or, Nations Baseball showcase in Venezuela. None of that existed. So I just sort of had to, figure it all out on my own. And as I kind of went along on my own and, calling around to people and, making different connections with people throughout Latin America. And, I'd be writing things like, oh yeah, like, this player trains with like Banana. And I was, cause everybody has a nickname for the most part. And I was like, man, people are going to think I'm out of my mind or something. Right. But it just sort of kept growing and evolving, and the industry kept growing and evolving too. When I was doing it for the first few years, it was basically our budget for international preview or international signing coverage was just whatever my phone bill was. But the interest from readers kept growing and growing so much. And obviously, I mean, you can see why now with, you've got guys like Juan Soto and Acuna and Vlad Jr. and Glaber, Torres, all these guys are making such young guys too. I mean, 19, 20 years old coming in and making, Devers, these guys are making a fast impact. So people want to know more about him, especially at a younger age. I mean, some of these guys are coming, Marco Luciano signed, and now he's, a little more than a year later, the Giants' #1 prospect in their system. So these guys are having a fast impact, so people want to know more and more about them. So I've been able to, fortunately over the last several years, been able to travel more and more, especially to the Dominican Republic, which is kind of like the international headquarters for every club there. So really, really enjoyed getting to travel to the Dominican Republic. Definitely miss it right now, being able to travel. But yeah, that's kind of how the whole process has evolved. I just saw something where, you know what, nobody's covering this, but there's, so many players coming out of the international signing process, and it's just kind of, it just gets bigger every year.
Absolutely. How's your Spanish?
Tratando.
Ah, tienen que practicar, sigue
Yeah,
practicando.
it's like, if I go to the Dominican Republic, or I need to talk to like players, other people in the country, I can communicate with them fine. But if I need to get like a word for word interview, especially in my role, I want to make sure I have somebody who can help make sure I don't uh, misquote anybody or anything like that.
Well, you definitely become I mean, I don't want to say pop star because you don't sing, but you're definitely an influencer. Because all these guys are on social media and they love Instagram and social media. You definitely become an influencer, and people there specifically, from what I hear, from what I understand, they love seeing you around. And I've enjoyed your videos that you post on Instagram when you're commuting from one location to another location. Very funny stuff, very great stuff, man. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like I said, I love being down there and getting to see, where these kids spend their day, where they train, where they come from, both from a baseball perspective and just general life, and just driving around the Dominican Republic. I like, going to the different parts of the country. I love driving up to like I don't like driving in the Dominican Republic. I shouldn't say that, but like, but I do like going up to like the Cibao. Is such a different vibe, such a different feeling compared to like Santo Domingo or San Pedro or San
That's
Cristobal.
where I'm from. I'm from Puerto Plata,
Oh, okay.
and so my brother who does the show with me, he couldn't make it today. The general manager of Los Tiburones de Puerto Plata, the professional team for the summer league
Oh, okay.
in Puerto Plata, and we've been talking about launching a U25 league for a lot of the minor league players that got let go from Major League. And we've been talking about that because there's very little coverage in the north side of the area of the island. Everything is in Santo Domingo, and all the academies and the relationships are down there. But we're trying to figure a way where we can bring more awareness to Puerto Plata and some of the towns in the north.
Yeah, I think I love that idea, especially because like we were talking about earlier, so much of the focus on players in Dominican Republic is, kids who are 16 or 17 years old. Sometimes you're talking about, guy who's like 17 years old. He's like a passed over player. Like, well, he's like 17. Like that's junior in
Yeah.
the United States. The Cardinals just signed this pitcher, Edwin Nunez, for about $500,000. Kind of an unusual circumstance because he throws 100. He just touched 100 miles an hour. Which is awesome to hear about. But so many of these guys in the Dominican Republic who are, 18, 19 years old, who, we're considered these like older guys, right? Like, the age of like a high school senior in the United States, who knows, like if they just keep, getting an opportunity to keep playing, you could have I don't even want to use the term like late bloomer on somebody who's 19 or like 20 years old, right? But you could have somebody like that who definitely I think could be somebody who could sign and potentially even get to the big leagues. It's just there's not that opportunity because so much of the focus and the money, so all of the incentive for the trainers and agents is to focus on the younger players. So I think I would love to see something like that would give some of the guys who aren't just 15, 16, 17 years old an opportunity like that.
You mentioned earlier about some of the reforms that you would like to see. What are the things that that you like about the system in Latin America and these international players, and what are the pieces that you think that needs to improve?
Yeah, the things that I see is, especially things that have kind of evolved over the years that I've been doing this, is that there's so much more of an emphasis on games now than there was when I started, right? When earlier on, there was very little, organization. You didn't have, Dominican Prospect League or International Prospect League, JDB baseball, these, platforms that are, bringing these kids together from a bunch of different programs and putting them together in games. So, the scouts can see these guys in games. The trainers now are realizing, yeah, okay, like, scouts, if you want, their teams are basically saying, hey, if you want, $500,000 or $900,000 for that guy, like, we need to see him a decent amount. We need to see him a decent amount in games too. We're not just going to sign him because he runs a 6'6" and, can hit the ball over the fence in BP. That's, we made enough mistakes over the years. We're not, we're trying to avoid that. So, the evolution of that, and just the evolution of how players are being trained is, I think, just keeps getting better. Like I was saying before too, with the way we have this system where, kids who can come from really, really poor backgrounds in these countries can, have, access to all of these resources to just to be able to play baseball, to get seen by major league clubs without having to, really pay much, if anything, up front. I think is a good thing. I mean, we don't have college baseball in the Dominican Republic or high school teams, so we got to find another way to put all these kids in games and give all these kids, resources to be able to play the game and to play organized baseball, and to be ready for professional baseball. But obviously, like you said, there's definite abuses that occur through the system. I mean, a big one, obviously, I think people understand is performance enhancing drugs. Kids who are being given steroids. There are players who test positive on, when they sign their contract, but there's also players who just, you know, test positive on a pre-contract basis and are not suspended because, those positive tests are not subject to suspensions or to a suspension. So nobody, for the most part, and really ever hears about it. But it's terrible to hear about a 15-year-old kid or younger even testing positive for steroids, because it's I don't know 100% of every case, but I imagine it's very few cases where the kid is going out and choosing to use steroids on his own. It's somebody else who is going to get paid a percentage of his contract, who's giving this kid steroids, whether he understands it or whether the player understands what's happening or not. So, Major League Baseball has implemented more drug testing at a younger age than ever before. But at the same time, there's only so much they can do, and I wish I had an answer for how to stop it, because it's terrible to hear about that, to know that there's that's a part of the system for some players. But it's there's you don't need to be like licensed to to represent a player in Latin America to sign. These are not guys who are going on to the 40-man roster. It could just be Joe Schmo off the street, or it could be somebody running a big program too. It's just really tough to regulate and try to as much as I would love to completely stomp it out of the system altogether. It's really hard to to try to curb what happens in that aspect.
What do you think of the Winter Baseball League in the Dominican Republic?
It's fun. It's fun. I mean, it's not quite, like it used to be where the major league teams would have like, their star players playing there all the time. But, it's the atmosphere is wild. I mean, seeing this, especially like it's awesome when like the teams will let like, especially like their top prospects play down there, like seeing like Fernando Tatis Jr. playing a couple years ago, like, and playing for his hometown team, and just like how crazy the whole stadium would be going for him. Like everybody knew he's like the next big thing even before he got to the major league level. Like seeing the celebration when they won it all. So yeah, the atmosphere is just, it's awesome. I mean, it's not quite the same level of like prospect, that you would see if, watching from that perspective compared to like the Arizona Fall League. But I mean, just the atmosphere is just awesome to see.
3 tips that you would give these aspiring baseball players in Latin America,
For the players.
for the players, the kids. Yep.
Good one. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, try to play as many games as you can. I mean, I think there's nothing that um, kids take a lot of ground balls and take a lot of BP every day it seems. But even if it's just a live BP, seeing pitchers, it's or just trying to get into as many games as you can is really beneficial, because a lot of times you go down there and you see players where it's like, oh, you can kind of tell this kid has not played a lot of baseball in his life, because like it's a real nice easy swing and BP and everything looks good when you're in a groove and everything is coming, or the rhythm of like how your coach usually hits you a fungo. And then in the game, like, oh, like you can just tell like the instincts are not there because he hasn't played a lot of baseball compared to the other kids, like obviously like a Wander Franco when he was that age, or seeing kids now like Manuel Beltre or Armando Cruz, where it's like the baseball IQ, the game acumen is just like so high for their age because they just played so many games. So I think that's important. And just trying to play against better competition is a second thing. I mean, that's one of the cool things about players in Dominican Republic and Venezuela is you'll have kids in that program who in a program who are 16 years old, or eligible pitchers maybe who are 17, 18 sometimes, who are in the same program as a kid who's like 13 years old trying to play against them, swinging a wood bat against a guy who's throwing like 88, maybe 90 miles an hour even sometimes. So, yeah, they might be overmatched sometimes because they're 13 years old swinging a wood bat against these kids, and sometimes they're not, which is really exciting. But the more experience they get playing against older kids and better competition, the better off they are. And then a third thing is just um, you know there's so much focus on baseball, but just as much as possible trying to still stay as active as you can with school. Teams are I mean, for your own sake, I think it's important. Obviously learning English is going to be super helpful coming over to a foreign country for the first time. I mean, it's going to be a shock, regardless, probably. And some of these kids now do have some experience traveling to the States more before they sign, but the more, the more comfortable you are in English, the more comfortable you're going to be in a new country with your new teammates on and off the field. But just keeping up with school in general, I think is important. Teams are looking for Obviously, talent on the field is king. That's primarily what clubs are looking for. But just being a smart kid is something that teams value, showing that you have that capacity to learn and retain information and be coached is something that clubs are looking for. So obviously from the baseball standpoint, it helps with just having an educational background too, to just to help you in life, and to have another option down the road. Because look, the reality is baseball is not going to be Major League Baseball is not going to be the end of the road for a lot of kids. So having that to in your back pocket, I think is really helpful for a kid to have.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's so important, the tips you just provided, because I think there's, unfortunately, a lot of that just gets lost. And many of the kids that that may get to play in the minor league system, double A, triple A, but then once they're done, it's like, where else can they go? What else can they do? I want to give you this time, so you can let us know, how can we follow you? How can we reach you? What you're working on? What's up next for you?
Yeah, so baseballamerica.com is our home. We've got, we depend on our subscribers there. We try to keep it affordable, about $6 a month. You can get access to all of our coverage for the draft. Obviously recapping the draft that just happened. Looking forward to the 2021 draft. Big showcase is already going on for that. Looking at underclassmen for years down the road. College baseball, minor league prospects. Obviously, no normal minor league season right now, but we just saw the 60-man roster player pools that came out, and it's pretty obvious teams are using these rosters not just for 2020, but you're seeing young players like an A ball, even some 2020 draft picks out of high school who are on these rosters. So we're going to have a lot to cover there, and then obviously the international stuff too, with our rankings and our projections for the 2020/21 class coming up there. And so we definitely rely on our subscribers, who've a lot of subscribers too, who've been subscribing to Baseball America since even before I've been working there. So definitely appreciate that. But all the stuff I put on Twitter, or on my Instagram account, Ben Badler, that's all free. Obviously, I mean, I love showing people just the best players from all over the world. Whether it's kid from Florida or New Hampshire or Puerto Plata or or Caracas. I mean, it's just I really like going around to see these players and just share it with people too. So people have a sense of who the top players are and what they look like all around the world, from age, from minor league prospects like a Gavin Lux or a Wander Franco, down to the teenage kids in the States and throughout Latin America too. So, but obviously to do that, we depend on our subscription. So I appreciate everybody who's subscribing to baseballamerica.com to make sure we can keep all those videos coming and all of our coverage coming. So definitely grateful for so many subscribers who help us be able to do that.
Sounds good. So I hope we're able to travel again very soon. And once that's lifted, let us know, because we would love to host you in Puerto Plata. I know my brother there would love to host you and show you around. And we hope that's soon, and you can start traveling again. Once again, thank you for coming on, and however we can help you with what you do, please let us know.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Have a good one, Ben.